Hello, this is Kevin Sloan with the University Rover Challenge, and we're coming to you today to do a preview of the URC 2024 science mission. I am excited to welcome in our esteemed science lead, Heather Smith. Heather, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah, there we go. I figure we'll get things off with a smile on your face. So there we go.
Laugh. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So, hey, the science mission, that's always one of the, well, probably the most unique mission at URC, because it's not just as simple as go out, do a task, you either did it or you didn't. There really is a lot of subjectivity that comes into it, and it relies on a lot more than just the rover's performance itself. So the science mission for this year is also a little bit different from the past couple of years. So what can teams expect this year?
Great. So first of all, teams can expect, like in the past, most of the science work, I would say 95% of the science work for the science mission should have been done before you ever arrived at URC. The actual competition is only probably about 5% of your total work for the science mission. And that is like a normal planetary mission. You have to prepare all of your science and the science justification, the science case for the mission prior to you even going to the place, because you have to know what kind of science you're looking for in order to make sure you have the correct instruments and analysis to be able to understand whatever you find there scientifically wise. So that's number one. That's the same, is that you need to have done a lot of preparation before arriving at URC, and all of the teams that were selected for the final challenge have done that preparation. So what we expect is you will show up on site, you'll check in, you will be assigned one of the two trailers, just like usual. You'll have about 10 minutes to set up, and then you will need to have your rover on the X. Once you start roving, you can use the time however the team feels best to accomplish their science. So one of the changes that we have from the previous years is we've allowed the team to choose their science and their science capability. It does not have to be life detection. A life detection payload will not get any more points than, say, a geology or a habitability one. Now, if a habitability one calls itself a life detection one, that is a problem. But otherwise, a habitability one, a life detection one, and a geology one, same amount of points, as long as the team understands the science that they're trying to accomplish and their anticipated results. So like I said, a team will show up, they will start on the X, and then they will have however long to rove. I think it's 20 minutes, and they will need to accomplish the science within the 20 minutes, and then they will have about 10 to 15 minutes to prepare a presentation. We actually, for the presentation, the judges will go into the trailer and listen to your presentation. That's actually where you get your points, is on your presentation. We will ask you questions about your science and expect for you to answer them correctly. We will also ask you questions about Mars and expect for you to answer them correctly. There should not really be any surprises. What we do as judges before the competition is we read through your science plans to make sure that what you're going to do, that we have the correct questions to ask you for what you're going to do, because I'm not going to ask you about a life detection payload if you're doing geology and vice versa. So for this year, we will make sure that our questions are relevant to your science. Also, what we'll do when the roving time is over, somebody will take your cache, and we will weigh your cache on a scale. And for the cache, we generally care that you have a cache. We aren't going to be as strict about the mass for the cache. You have to have a mass to it, but if you're like 0.05 off or 0.5 off, we'll have some tolerance within the mass required for it. So you don't have to be right on the dot, but you need to be in the general area of the range for the mass. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I might have a half a or 0.25 quarter gram too much, that's okay. We were not going to deduct for that. So also for the briefing, a lot of teams, prior to them showing up at URC, they have a PowerPoint presentation done. And all they need to do is fill in the results from the roving competition into their presentation. When you brief the judges, everything you show for the results need to be the results from that previous roving time. They can't be taken days earlier at MDRS. They have to be from that roving time. And you can also give us a slide that says this is previous data. It's fine as long as you label previous data. but the results from your tests need to be taken during that roving time. Let's see.
That's a great piece of advice that you gave the teams there, to plan out the brief and be prepared with that PowerPoint ahead of time, so that you're not wasting that valuable field time just putting words on the slide when it's really just that final data and analysis from the rover that's important to
right. And most teams do that. They have a chart, and you have generally you'll have, like, for an example for the results, you'll have a anticipated results and what you actually got. And then you also probably have a slide made up that says unanticipated results and what you got. And, you'll have to choose which slide did you guys get, or no results because, your analysis didn't work. Or you weren't able to collect a sample. So definitely when you put the presentation together, you usually have the best case, the worst case, and the middle ground scenario. And then you'll have to choose, which case did you actually achieve during that mission. Let's see. This year, we're going to keep the briefings to a strict time. Before, we asked a bunch of questions and we go over time, but this year we're going to keep it to a strict time.
Good science, we'll want more information.
Right, I know. I've gotten some feedback from the other judges saying they would prefer not to spend so much time on drilling them, but rather let them give more feedback. So we're going to do that this year. And we're also, in addition to sticking the time, we will ask each team, each team will get some standard questions, and then you'll get a relative question based on your science. We're not going to ask somebody a very hard, in-depth life detection question and ask a superficial geology one. No, everybody will get the same type of level of questioning during the briefing. Let's see. Some of the most common mistakes that people make, if you say something wrong or incorrect, that doesn't help you any. It is better for you to say, I don't know, than to say something incorrect. If you say something incorrect, it makes it look like that you don't have an understanding of anything. If you say you don't know, that means you just haven't looked it up yet, right? So just piece of advice for the briefing, I don't know is a perfectly okay answer, unless it's specifically a question about your payload that you are expected to know. And then I'll tell you that you would be expected to know that. But if it's just a general Mars question or general astrobiology question, it's okay to say you don't know. That's fine. Let's see. Another mistake a lot of teams make is the communications. There's something wrong with the communications. Either they can't communicate with the rover's not communicating. And I know that you guys test this stuff before you come out here, and when you have competition, there's just communication issues. 95% of the time, the communication issues are something to do with the team and is not interference. However, we do have a device that can determine whether or not it is interference. So if you do think that there's any radio interference, let us know. We will use that device. And again, like I said, 90% of the time, it's something within the teams. And once they reboot, they have it no problem.
And that is certainly not just unique to the science mission. We see that at all the sites. So yeah, okay. A good reminder for teams, when you think you're that there's jamming or interference, it is more often than not a loose cable that just came a little loose on the drive out to MDRS with the rover shaking in the back of the truck. So it's good to check those connections.
Yep. It's also okay to show up at the science site early. Just don't disturb the people that are competing. You can't go on the course and you can't look at the course before it's your time to actually show up, but you can show up earlier, unload your rover, make sure everything's working, off to the side. Don't turn on your comms yet, just because you don't turn on your comms until it's your actual time to set up for the science site. But you can show up early, and you also can't check out the site. So if you start walking to the site, somebody will greet you and say, you can't look at the site, go back to your rover. So you can show up early, but don't go onto the site early.
Now, Heather, something good to ask about, because I know it's very specific the way the teams are supposed to handle this. So the rover is supposed to be taking subsurface samples, correct?
Okay. The rover is supposed to take a sample of 15 centimeters at depth or deeper. 10 centimeters depth or deeper. 10 centimeters is 10 centimeters because that's just below the topsoil. And on Mars, we think that there is a lot of radiation on the surface, and so the organisms are not going to survive the surface. Now, half a centimeter below, sure, they might. But for the sake of the competition, we just said 10 centimeters at depth. In order to get to 10 centimeters, you have to go from 0 to 10. So you are welcome to keep that 0 to 10 sample somewhere separate than the 10 centimeters sample. You don't have to throw it away. Matter of fact, it's better if you don't just leave piles everywhere. It's better if you can collect it. And that is fine. But your analysis is done at 10 centimeters or deeper simply because of the radiation issue on Mars. And that's how the actual samples are collected. They are below the surface. And 10 centimeters, for those of you in the US, it's about 2.5.
Oh, no. Anyone in the U.S. is going to figure that out on their own.
Yeah, they are.
We're not doing metric English.
So, no, they have to, and for science-wise, we do centimeters anyway. Even in the U.S., we do centimeters. We don't do inches when we do planetary missions because they're international and Mars Polar Lander.
If any students were struggling to figure out how many inches, yeah, you guys got this. Come on.
Yeah, if you have any reason why everybody does centimeters, go ahead and Google Mars Polar Lander, and you will see why there is no inches to centimeters conversions ever. It just goes to centimeters. Everybody in the U.S. Okay, so that's a good question. You're welcome to keep that topsoil on the rover or dump it. It's better to keep it. If you put any chemicals on it, do not dump it. That would be contamination. Another thing that would be contamination is if you spill something out of your rover, whether that's anything other than water. Water is not appreciated, but water will get you less points deducted than anything other than water. Another thing that will definitely guarantee you won't score high, in addition to spilling something or running over something, is having your rover weigh too much. When we weigh it in, if it's overweight, that's huge deductions. It is much, much better to have a lower capability rover that is within the mass limit, which I believe is 50 kilograms. Yep. 50 kilograms, than to have a more capable rover at 52 kilograms. We do some tolerance with the scale by about half to 1 kilogram, but we don't do 2 kilograms worth. And that deducts, it's something like 40% or 20%. It's a lot of points.
5% per kilogram.
I don't know. It's a lot. To me, it's a lot. Whatever it is, when we're calculating it, and the way we get that is we do your total score, and then we go back and take whatever deductions off. So it's deductions off the total score.
Yeah, and for teams, that is standard across all of the mission sites. So if you're overweight, it is 5% of points earned per kilogram overweight. Yeah. So if you show up and you are 60 kilograms for the science mission, you can unfortunately kiss half those points goodbye. Half those very hard-earned points too.
Yeah, and they're pretty hard-earned points. Another issue, so the mass of the rover will get you highly deduction. Anything you spill or any contamination, that gets you very much deducted. An intervention gets deductions, but not nearly as much as a contamination issue, because a contamination issue jeopardizes the sample integrity and the science. It jeopardizes the science that you're trying to achieve and that the teams beyond you are trying to achieve. So don't spill anything. Let's see. The science task is also the only task that you can show up with without a working rover. Your rover has to be present and your rover has to be on the X. You can't make your rover people, but you can make your rover a lander. If your rover becomes a lander, unfortunately, this happens, you can still achieve quite a bit of science. Matter of fact, if your rover becomes a lander, you could score 100% as long as you still had power to it and you can still collect a sample. You don't have to technically move off the X. So technically, you can still do very well if your rover becomes a lander. At no point can your rover become a human and you can do well. No point. It's also better for point-wise not to have any interventions. It's a lot of times it's better if you've already collected your sample and you maybe have 5 minutes left of roving and your rover decides it doesn't want to communicate or just breaks for whatever reason. A lot of times it's much better to end your roving time early than it is to try to do an intervention. Matter of fact, it is better to injure roving time early than it is to do an intervention. Because again, we take off all the points. Once everything is added to a total score, we'll go and take off the deduction points. So we don't take it off just for a subset of it. We take it off after everything is accumulated.
Yep.
So,
yeah, and for teams, an intervention is where you plan to continue with the rover working after you've done some maintenance on it, and that does incur the 20% penalty for each individual deduction. But if you decide to just terminate the mission early and bring the rover back, and you're done with the roving time, then there's no penalty for that. And you, regardless of what happens there with calling it early, you get to continue with that analysis and then the presentation to the judges.
Right. Right, and you actually, let's just say you injure roving time early, you'll get that time tacked onto your analysis time before the briefing. So when you show up, you'll have a set amount of time that from your time to the start to the time that you give the briefing, and you can use that time how you want. If you want to rove early, you can't rove longer, but you can you can end early for roving.
Yep.
And I don't know if
Yeah,
you're
and the
20 or 30 minutes, but the time that we've given you to rove is plenty of time. And you also can only collect as many as you want samples, but I suggest you collect one sample and one sample well, and then try to do a second sample.
Yep. Yeah, and the times that we've mentioned tonight, those are just notional. Teams can refer to the final schedule, which we're going to be publishing just before the competition. That'll have the specific time, so please make sure you're referencing that. Don't just rely on what we mentioned tonight, just as examples of that.
Correct. And we also go by the printed schedule that from the day of. So actually, I think we get it the night before. But we'll go on those schedules, and those are hard times. We can't change those times. Also, if you feel that you're coming to a site and you have a flat tire or something that happens, if at all possible, get a hold of Kevin. We will try to make arrangements. We can't guarantee it, but at the science site, we will try to make arrangements for it because that's the only competition you do that day. The engineering sites might be a different story because you have 2 or 3 competitions at that place. But for the science, if there's something that's out of your control, such as a flat tire or something like that, that's fine. If you just need more time, yeah, we don't grant that.
Yeah, and that is an important reminder. This happens every year to probably at least 2 teams each year, where teams are working to debug or get something working. Just go back to what Heather said earlier. Bring what you can of the rover. Show up on time because you're going to get more points by being present with whatever you have of your rover. You'll get more points by going through the discussion with the judges on time, rather than showing up an hour late and hoping that the rover maybe gets operational, because you may not actually have a competition slot at that point.
Yeah, that's a great point. Show up with your rover, even if you're like you don't even have a battery or a motherboard in your rover. Fine, show up with it, have it sitting on the X, and we can. I'll be like, all right, if your rover can't even get power, this is where you come in with the data that you did prior to coming, and you show us your anticipated results. Now, you won't get the credit for the results of that day, but you will still get probably at least 50%. Assuming you can answer the science questions correct. The science is the only task that if your rover is not functioning, but you know the science, you can score relatively okay. It is much better to have a non-functioning rover and know your science than to have a functioning rover and not know the science. Just FYI, this is the science mission. It is the only one that you can, again, really have a horrible rover that isn't working. But if you know your science, you can do well. I'll point out an example from maybe 8 years ago. A team shows up. The science lead comes to me and says, we're here to do the mission. They didn't have a rover. And they said, oh, we were told we didn't need a rover. And I said, you will maybe get 10% if you don't come bring your rover. Just a second, my computer's trying to update. Okay. But if you come with your rover, we can have discussions. Okay, so they came with the rover. The rover didn't move, but the science knowledge that the science team members had was very high. And they ended up winning the John Baranka Award, which is a high award for scientific achievement. And they got, I think, a 70 or 75% on the science task. And that is because they knew Every single science question that we answered, they knew the reason for it, they knew analysis, they knew their expected results. The rover didn't work, but this was a science mission, and they got the science correct. I forgot they did have the rover, and the rover did collect a sample. It just didn't move anywhere. It did collect a sample. So again, if you show up to the science, even if you think you're not doing well, because it may be the only task that you get points in, and you really don't leave with 0.
Yep. So we're gonna cross our fingers and hope that we've got all rovers up operational and working through all of URC. But of course, we know the desert has a say in this as well, as does the infamous Murphy of Murphy's Law. So, but Heather, it's really good guidance for the teams. I think we're probably going to wrap it up here. Okay. But thank you very much for taking the time to walk teams through it. Teams, hope you found this helpful. We're looking forward to seeing you all out in Utah in a pretty short period of time here. So we're just a week away from the time we're recording this video on the 22nd here. So we'll see teams in Utah soon. Safe travels. Good luck with those final rover preparations, and make sure you're prepping on that science. Thanks again.
Right. Yep. All right. And read through those questions we sent around for the science plan, because one of them will be in the briefing, and that'll be worth at least 10 more points.
There you have it. Thanks. Extra credit from Heather.
Have a great travels. We'll see you in less than a week. Okay. Bye.